Mother Knows Death, starring Nicole and Jemmy and Maria Q. Kane.
Hey guys, welcome to Mother Knows Death. The news has been so heavy this week, and we thought we would lighten it up a little bit and talk to one of our friends, Paul Koudounaris. Paul has a PhD in art history from the University of California and has written widely on European ossuaries and charnel houses for both academic and popular journals. He is the author of Empire of Death, A Cultural History of Ossuaries and Charnel Houses, Memento Mori, The Dead Among Us, Heavenly Bodies, Cult Treasures, and Spectacular Saints from the Catacombs, a book about domestic felines called A Cat's Tale that was a Barnes & Noble Book of the Year, and his latest book was called Faithful Unto Death, Pet Cemeteries, Animal Graves, and Eternal Devotion. Hi, Paul. Welcome to Mother Knows Death.
Hi, Nicole. Hi, Maria. Nice to see you again.
All right,
Nice to see you.
So we decided that the news has been so crazy this week and we just need a break, and you're the perfect person to bring everyone this break and laughs that we need. Learning amazing.
Laughed over mummies in Indonesia. That's fair.
No, listen, our conversations really make me happy, so I just wanted to spread the happiness with everyone. So, all right.
Share the joy.
Weeks ago, so let's start. So a couple weeks ago, you're on a trip. You're always on a trip, and I say, "Where are you?" And the conversation just goes down all of these crazy lanes, and I'm like, "All right, we need to talk about this with everyone." So let's start off by telling everyone where you were.
Well, I had actually, when I spoke to you, I was in Indonesia. I was in Tana Toraja, which is part of the island of Sulawesi, and I was at a mummy festival. It's called Manane, where they dress the mummies. But before that, I had actually been in Thailand doing something really fascinating, documenting animal funerals, because there's a temple in Bangkok where they do funerals for pets, and they do these Buddhist pet cremations, and then they take them down to the river and release them. So in terms of the this deathy stuff, it was a fantastic trip.
All right, so you've been to Indonesia before for this, so just I guess go over exactly what happens there.
Well, first of all, if you've never been to Indonesia, the thing you have to understand is that it's a country of islands, which is obvious if you look at a map, but you have to understand that each island is almost like its own separate country. They have their own customs, they have their own beliefs, they have their own culture. And so even within certain islands, because they're large, you can find pockets that are culturally completely different than others. And the Torajan tradition has always been, Tana Toraja being part of the island of Sulawesi, the Torajan tradition has always been this fixation on death. The biggest event in your life is actually your death, your funeral. It's not your birth, it's not your wedding. That's in American culture, we all know the thing that costs the most is the wedding, right? People pay out massive amounts of money for wedding. In Toraja, it's the funeral. People will keep mummies in their home. They'll keep their mummified relatives in their home for sometimes years until they have enough money for the funeral, because it involves, accumulating a certain amount of buffaloes and pigs that have to be sacrificed and building these enormous structures. So there's real fixation on death. The dead are not considered to be gone. The dead are still members of the community. They've just kind of transitioned into another phase. They've transitioned into a silent phase. So they're still members of the community. So even after the funeral, they're not buried in the ground and put away. They're not stigmatized or ghettoized in a funeral in a cemetery the way they are in the United States. The dead will be placed in above ground family crypts, all one family together in a crypt. And then once a year, when the rice crop comes in, so this usually happens in August because the rice crop comes in sometime around August, they have spare time, and it's August kind of becomes the month that they will dedicate to the dead. And so a lot of these families then will open the crypts and they'll take the mummies out. They will clean them. They will lovingly redress them. They'll walk them around the village. They'll talk to them about family life, and they'll reestablish this bond with the people who have passed on, because the dead there aren't dead the way they are in the United States. the dead there are still parts of the community and they still have a role to play. And so if you show up in August and you tour some of these outlying villages, you can see exactly this, the manane, this mummy ritual. You can see them opening the tombs, opening the coffins, taking out the mummified ancestors, cleaning them, redressing them, and walking around with
And they don't mind just Americans going and just observing?
them. No, they don't. That becomes an interesting question too, because this has never been too touristy. It's not like Dia de los Muertos, which is an entire industry and, has movies based around it like Coco. The Monene has always been very small in terms of outsiders. That is beginning to change, and it will be interesting to see how that culture adapts and how they react to more visitors coming. But I've been 4 times to this now, and, at the most, you go to a village, and at the most, they'll tell you, "Oh my god, there were so many tourists here today," and at the most, it might be about 20. So it's really still a very small number. It's really just a trickle of people who are coming through Tana Toraja to watch this thing with the mummies, but that is beginning to change, and I don't know if that will have an effect on how they view outsiders, but they've always been very open. They've always been very willing to share this, and they enjoy sharing this. The thing that doesn't come across in the photos, and I know you have some photos and some videos to show that I took. The thing that doesn't come across in the photos is that we think of this, if we in the United States were to have a ceremony like this, where we exhumed our relatives and we redressed them, we would think of this as being something very somber and very mournful. It's not there. It's celebratory. It's fun because they don't view the dead the way we view the dead. They don't view them as being gone. They just view them as kind of silent partners in the community. And so this is a fun festival. You'll have people joking around. They'll light cigarettes and put them in their mouth, in the mummies' mouths, and take pictures of the mummies smoking cigarettes. They'll put funny hats on them. They themselves will pose for funny selfies with their own dead relatives. I was in one of these villages. I don't know if I sent this photo, and I don't know if you have it, but in those you've selected for this episode, but there was a dog running around. There was a mummy of a husband and a wife, and their caskets had just been opened, and there was this dog running around. And I said, "Hey, was that dog owned by this family?" And someone told me, "Yeah, it was." I was like, "Oh, it would be great to get the dog in the photo." And there was someone else there who was an American. He's like, "Oh, that would be really disrespectful. Don't do that. That's really rude of you to even suggest that." And I was like, "No, I don't think they're going to mind." And so I had my guide go over and ask him, he's like, "Hey, what do you think about getting the dog in the photo with the mummies?" And they're just like, "Oh, that's a great idea. That's wonderful." And, they brought food over to kind of encourage the dog to stand in front of the mummies. So it's not this somber thing like we tend to think as outsiders. They're very welcoming people coming because for them, it's a celebration. It's a big party. They love these ancestors and they love sharing this with us.
All right, so then so for those of you that are listening, we do have these videos. This is the first time that we're doing this on Mother Knows Death, so bear with us if if it doesn't go according to plan. But I guess we should start with this first video, video number 1 of what appears to be a husband and wife. I don't know if this is the same couple you were talking about or a different one.
Yeah, that's them. The dog won't be in the video, but there is a still photo that shows the dog just standing there right in front of them. But yeah, so that's them. That's a husband and wife. Their families from the village had opened up the caskets and they cleaned them. I have a bunch of photos of them cleaning them off. They'll usually clean them off with a soft brush, like a paintbrush. So they'll dust them off and clean them, and they'll cut away those old clothes, and then they'll redress them. And they're very careful. It's like one of the things that's really touching to me is watching them checking the necklace, like the woman's necklace. That particular woman, they were carefully checking her necklace to make sure all the beads were still on it and to make sure the clasp was still good. They'll take the glasses off and they'll clean the glasses and put the glasses back on. They'll make sure they have, that their watches are still attached properly. And that woman, by the way, this was my favorite detail of that couple. So they were cleaning out the woman's coffin because they also clean the coffin. If they take the mummies out, they clean the coffin out, they dust the coffin out and get all the junk out of it. And and her purse was sitting there. They had buried her with a pink purse that matched that shirt she was wearing. And then I saw the guy opening the purse to inspect it. I was like, oh, what's in her purse? And he pulls out one item. There was one item in this woman's purse, and it was a dagger.
That's so interesting. So when they put this clothing on them, is it new clothing that's bought for the celebration, or is it the person's existing clothing or family heirlooms or mix?
That's a great question. Because they oftentimes bury them with a huge variety of their own clothing, as if, who knows, maybe the spirit wants to change clothing, mid-death or something. They will usually they'll have to buy new clothing to put on them when they redress them. And the reason is this. When you think just functionally about robing a corpse, rigor mortis has set in. And so you can watch them. Sometimes they'll show up with say shirts or dresses in multiple sizes because you can't bend those arms in, right? And so sometimes they're going to have to buy something that's bigger than the person actually wore to be able to have enough stretch on the garment to get it over their arms and their shoulders.
It's interesting.
The number one question I get asked about this is, does it stink? It's like, no, it doesn't stink any worse than an old shoe, right? They're old leather by now. It's just a little musty.
Do
But the
they
number two
get into
question,
the process with you at all?
yeah. But I was going to say the number two question I get asked is, how do they get a shirt onto a guy whose arms don't move? That's why they often use shirts that are too big. Yeah. So they used to use natural tannins, but nowadays they just use formaldehyde. Formaldehyde, they've been doing this for a long time, obviously. They've been doing this, exactly how long they've been doing this is debatable. I've heard people claiming that they've been doing this for millennia. I have not seen evidence of that, but I've definitely seen mummies that have got to be about 100 years old. It's about the oldest I've seen before they completely fall apart. Nowadays, they do it with formaldehyde, and you can tell. I did send some stuff over where it wasn't in the tombs, but in people's homes. And I visited a lot of homes where they do still have the mummies, waiting for the funeral. And they look amazing. And it's all from this formaldehyde. They really, really shoot them up with a lot of formaldehyde to preserve them. So that's been introduced in it. And so they do use the formaldehyde now rather than the natural methods, just because it works much better.
This is really interesting to me because, all right, Ray, show pick 6 because he was talking about that a little bit earlier about how they clean them up.
That's her.
Wait, we have another. It's just gonna take a sec for it to pop up, I think.
This one.
You were saying with the brush that how they clean them up.
Yeah, with the soft brush. That's how they usually clean them.
So, I guess from a decomposition standpoint, my question is, because they when a person dies, they're going to have rigor mortis for after death, but that goes away after a couple of days for sure.
There he is. Yeah, that's the same guy. That's the husband, and you can see he's cleaning off the guy's nose.
Yeah, so they do that every year when.
Well, not necessarily every year. The Monone goes. This is what gets very confusing. Because I've had people tell me, I want to go see this, what's the schedule? As if it's, some like published schedule somewhere, like a public holiday in the United States. And it doesn't work that way. There's about a period of about 2 weeks to a month where villages might potentially be doing this, anywhere from when they bring the rice crop in until when they have to start working on whatever the next thing is. And so there's a period of about a month where they might be doing it, and each village can do it at different times. Not every village chooses to do it every year. And even in the village that does choose to do it, they don't do everybody. So it might be, I'd say on the average, a corpse comes out and is re-robed about every 3 years, I would say on the average. So, this year it was this guy's turn. The guy we're looking at in the picture, mom and dad. This year, someone said, let's get mom and dad out, and instead of Uncle Pete, let's do mom and dad this year. So they don't do everybody every year. And as I said, it's not every village is doing it at a different time. By the way, watching the picture of the guy with the the paintbrush cleaning them off. My favorite guy was someone at one of the villages. I guess he just didn't have enough time. So they opened the coffins and he just walked up with a giant push broom and just started sweeping everybody off,
God.
like 2 of them at a time, you know.
Oh my God. All right, so put up picture 2, Ray. So this is my question after. So I think that we
Yeah.
talked about this in our text that some of these bodies have a very interesting appearance because this
Yes,
isn't a
but you
classic.
of course had to choose the one where the guy's wearing the fake beard
Well,
mask
this because
and
this
not
was
say anything
amazing.
about
I'm
it as if,
sorry.
yeah, and not say anything about it as if this is normal.
No, this
I
was amazing when you sent this. I'm like, dude, like I'm so fortunate to be friends with someone that has the opportunity to take a photo like this. I just don't even know where to start.
This is his grandmother. So regarding the mask, a lot of them do wear masks. I try when I take the photos to take more photos of people without masks than with masks, just because it's not some kind of like, COVID thing. And that's why I try to get away from that symbolism. Because when Americans see that, when they see masks now, they think of COVID. It's not because they think they're gonna get COVID. It's not because they think they're going to get some infection from the dead people. It's simply for dust because, there's so much dust. Like, I've watched some of these mummies getting, uh, blown off brushed off for the dust, and it's like a fog machine that's gone off because it's not just dusty in the tomb, the skin is deteriorating. So you got these skin particles accumulating, they're brushing them off, and it creates a kind of cloud. And so a lot of times they do wear the masks for the dust. That's why this guy's wearing this mask. I don't know why he chose this particular mask, but he it's for dust. This is a great picture actually because he it makes that point that I was trying to make, that this is fun. This is celebratory. This guy is not mocking it. He's just having fun with it. He's like, I'm going to go take grandma out and I'm going to wear the funny mask.
Since you've been all over the world looking at different cultures and have had experience with multiple different kinds of mummies, do you think that these ones look a little bit different than other ones that you've seen? As far as
Oof.
I'm just curious about the decomposition process, just because of just because of the way they're treating the bodies and then the particular environment they're in versus somewhere like Sicily that has a completely different environment, right? That
That's a tough question to answer because when they've been desiccated to this extent, they all kind of start to look the same. Dried
okay.
skin inevitably starts to look like dried skin. There are differences here. The coloration of these is significantly different than the coloration of the mummies I've seen in places like Sicily. But then again, these people have a different tonal pigment to their skin. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's simply the tonal pigment to their skin. You would know this better than I think. Maybe you'd know the answer to this better than I, but maybe the tonal coloration of their skin is still preserved for a while, versus some, I don't know, environmental issue.
Well, it's interesting because I did say that I noted, Bree, put that picture back up, that there's something called, so you, on top of the mummification, there's also something called adipocere, which I could see,
Yeah.
which is something that is a more rare thing that happens during the decomposition process, which is specific to being inside of an environment that doesn't have any air, particularly like if someone's buried in soil, for example, not in a box in soil, but like just no air environment that's also moist, which is why I'm getting there with the environment there, because it's a little bit more like tropical,
Human.
like there.
Yeah, it's certainly yes and no. Toraja's at elevation, and it's one of the least tropical. It's one of the least humid areas I've been in Indonesia. But That being said, yes, it's still probably more humid than Italy.
Yeah, that's just like, I mean, it's humid, less humid there, but compared, just because typically the mummification process is to remove water. That's how you get like a true mummified body, but because you really can't, just because it's in the air, that's what's might be creating this specific, like the more yellow white look with these patches here. It's just something that I was curious about, that's all. All right, Ray, put up photo three. Three. Okay. So I'll describe the photo for those who are just listening. It appears to be a husband and wife who are wearing baseball hats, and there's a daughter and a son who seem to be 10 to 12 to 13 years old range, and they're holding a child, a mummy child that's wearing a dress, and it looks like the most awkward family photo ever, right? But the guy's wearing a Yankees hat, and
Well, yeah,
you were
there were the whole family wearing Yankee hats there.
and what
I
happened when
asked
you asked them? Yeah.
Well, I asked them about the Yankees, and, I asked because the whole family was wearing these Yankee hats, and I asked them, it's like, "Hey, so you guys like the Yankees?" They're like, they're just hats." And some of them were like, "Yeah, Yankees." And I said, "Who's your favorite player?" And some girl said Babe Ruth. At
So
least she knows who
amazing.
Babe Ruth is.
So then all of these conversations get really good when I'm having a text with Paul. So of course, when I look at this photo, my first question is like, "Well, what happened to this kid?" And he's like, "She died."
Well, it's not untrue.
No, I know it's
Um,
not.
uh, Keep in mind that compared to the United States, infant mortality is very high in Indonesia in general, and especially in Tana Toraja. So it's not surprising to find a high percentage of infant mummies. One of the more touching things on this trip was a family that was cleaning off the remains of a baby that had died at the age of 4 hours. So it had barely lived at all. It hadn't even lived for a day. And I don't know if you recall, I did send you some pictures of that. And you had mentioned, it's like, wow, this kid was really young, that because the sutures on the skull hadn't even closed. They were still open. The skull was still fragmented. It was, still in multiple pieces. And this kid had died something like 20 years ago. But when you think about it, it really is a very touching gesture to allow this child who never had a chance to life to continue to live on in a way as a beloved member of the family and as a member of the community. And so they were very, very careful and very, very gentle with this infant's remains, like checking, like, because you also, the normal mummification process apparently that they're using apparently can't really be done with infants in the same way it can be done with grown-ups. And so this one was more skeletal. So they were very careful, going through and checking all the clothing for every tiny little toe bone and every tiny little finger bone and making sure that every part of this kid was still in there. And it was really, like I said, it was probably the most touching moment of this trip to see this infant that had died at just a few hours still receiving, well, I was gonna say still receiving love, but receiving the love that had never had an opportunity to receive in life.
So some of these people keep the mummies in their homes, correct?
Yeah, as I said, it's because the funeral process is so lengthy, and it can take years and years to get enough money for the funeral. I've visited people who've had mummies in their homes for, up to 10 years, like really a very long time. The first time I went to Taraja, things really got put in perspective for me when I had a guide by the name of Auguste, and I asked him whether he knew anybody who kept mummies in the home because I would like to visit some mummies at home. And he started telling me a story, and he said, "Well, when I was a kid, we had the mummy of my grandfather in the home. It just lived with us, and every morning, we'd stand it up in the corner, and we'd put its day clothes on, and then in the evening we'd put its pajamas on, and then we would just put it in the bed, and my brother and I would sleep with his mummy.
This, when you say this,
Which is not normal. Like, where
it's-
normally they don't sleep with the mummy. They're usually in home with the coffin, but Goose was an older guy, and maybe that's how they did it back in the day.
it's just so
But yeah, he
it's
and his
so
brother
cool.
slept in the bed with his grandfather's mummy.
Like to hear that as an American, it just sounds so weird, but like when you when you really think about it, how you're telling the story and stuff, it's like we're the weird ones because they're able to get on with their life and not be devastated by the death of someone, which is, I mean, we need to bring more of that here so it's just not so terrible, because people die all the time accidentally, just naturally die younger than they should, and sometimes it completely ruins their family's life because of it. And this
Well,
is
we
cool.
are the weird ones historically and culturally, because when you look at death culture across the world and you look at it historically, the dead had never really been ghettoized the way they are in American and European culture until around the last century, until really the beginning of the 20th century is when we really started going at it in this way. It used to be very common for people to die at home and to keep the body at home, sometimes for a lengthy period for the funeral. Even within Europe, those great collections of mummies in Italy, sometime in Palermo, for instance, thousands and thousands of them, that was still going until the early 20th century. And we're the one who changed it and then projected this idea that we now have. A lot of it had to do with hygiene laws, and it's understandable as metropolitan areas became extremely large. In the medieval world, they didn't have cities of millions and millions of people. They didn't have millions of people they needed to inhume. And so, when you have millions of dead people, you do have to start making an accommodation. Part of the reason they made all those giant cemeteries in Paris when they did is there were certain neighborhoods where the groundwater in that neighborhood was being contaminated by corpse juice, because they were burying them in the local churchyards, and the churchyards themselves had become so exhausted. The nutrients in the soil that would process the bodies had become so exhausted that they could no longer process human flesh. And so the bodies were basically just oozing out into the groundwater. And it is it is a sincere public health concern if you've got that going on. So in some ways, we had to change things. We had no choice when our population exploded and these metropolitan areas became very huge. But historically and cross-culturally, we are the weird ones for doing things the way we're doing now, and then projecting that idea across the rest of the world. And it's like, hey, look what you're doing. You people over there are a bunch of savages. You're playing with the dead. This isn't the way it's, this isn't the objectively true way we're supposed to have a relationship with the dead. And it's just nonsense. It's it's this false hubris that the way we do things and the method that we've invented for our culture is somehow right, and it should be right for everybody. And as I said and you said, we're the weird ones. We came up with something that is historically very different than humanity had been doing it for millennia.
It's very sterile.
Here, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple stories in the news over the past couple of years that have been like a husband's wife died and he was living with the dead body in his house for months, sometimes even longer. And it kind of sucks because these people get in trouble for this. And
Yeah.
and in other cultures, it would just be considered, of course, like you don't want to leave your wife's body sometimes. And even though the decomposition process can be a very gross thing, when you're in love and you have a connection with someone, you kind of can overlook that.
Right. It was something that I realized when I was working on those mummies in Sicily, that if you had gone back in time into the 19th century in Palermo, Norman Bates, well, we'll leave out the murder part, but Norman Bates would have been considered a loving son, for preserving his mother and mummifying her and dressing her up and continuing this relationship with her. That would have been considered an act of love. And, by the 1950s, it was considered the act of a criminal lunatic.
Yeah, and a good piece for a horror film. It's kind of
Right.
amazing.
This episode is brought to you by The Gross Room.
Guys, the Gross Room is on sale for only one more day, right? On Friday, we are done with the sale, and it doesn't go on sale that much, so you really should take advantage of it. It is only $20 for a whole entire year of Gross, which includes articles, thousands and thousands of articles going back to 2019 with photos, videos. It's a lot, and it's only $20 for the year, and every single day you get new material, so it's just endless. This week's high profile or celebrity death dissection is on Charlie Kirk, and there's a lot of activity on that. It's really awesome because we're all having a conversation that is civil about it, just talking about the forensics and the investigation. So check that out.
Head over to thegrossroom.com now to sign up.
Ray, show video too, because this one's got a good story if you're willing to tell it.
All right, sound on.
Yeah, keep the sound on.
Okay.
This is the kid, isn't it?
Yes. Okay, so this guy is
So the
shaking
thing,
this baby like it's a Maroc.
yeah, the thing you're hearing rattling is his brain. There is a great story with this. A couple great stories, weird stories, and the viewer will have to decide what they think is credible. But with that preface, the first time I had been to Toraja, and I had mentioned that I've already mentioned that I asked my guide whether he knew anybody with mummies in the house. And he said to me, yeah, I know a place where they have this mummified little girl. She lives in the house. It's their daughter. She was found in a crypt somewhere. No one knew who she was. They felt she was lonely, or they felt they heard her crying, so they took her into the home. This is that girl. This was about 10 years ago when I first met her. I wrote a book called Memento Mori, and I included that story, and I included photos of her. Since that time, every time I've gone back to Toraja, I've asked about this little girl, and no one knows what has happened to this little girl. People say, no, we've never seen this mummy. We don't know anything about her. We don't know what you're talking about. So I had never known what had happened to this little girl. And then on this last trip this year, in August, I asked my guide, I'd like to set up some tours of homes where they have mummies living there. And we had visited a couple, and then he came to me and he said, yeah, there's apparently a woman named Susan who is mummified in a home very far from here, but it's a couple hours drive, but they said we could go and meet her. And so we drove out there, and we got there, and the guy comes out. He's the head of the village. The guy shaking her is that guy. He's the head of the village. He comes out, he brings out some coffee and some sticky rice. He said, well, I'd like to talk to you about her and drink some coffee with you first before we meet her, because she's a very special mummy. And I said, so we sat down and we talked to the guy, and he said, well, first of all, her name is Susan, and she's very small. It's like, how small? And he's like, she weighs about a pound. And she is very small, by the way. It's like, that's odd. And I started to get the impression when he was describing this mummy that this might be deja vu. And then he said something about, and she told me that an old friend was coming to visit her today. It's like, she what? And sure enough, he brought her out, and it was her. It was that little girl that I had met 10 years ago and had lost track of. He believes that she has kind of quasi-magical powers. He says he talks to her in dreams, that in the dreams she jumps up and down on his bed, and he touches her foot. She touches his foot and tickles it. And the track of her is because someone came to the village and tried to buy her, and they had decided to hide her away in the house of the guy who's in charge of the village, the head of the village, so that no one would be tempted to steal her and sell her, because then, first of all, she's considered a member of the community now, and so that would be a heinous act. It would be like selling someone into slavery. But also, they believe they could be cursed, if she's sold. Ethically cursed, as well as maybe by her if she has magical power. The thing that gets really weird about this story is I asked who tried to buy her, and he said a guy had come to the village saying that he was a representative of the Saudi Arabian army, and that he had heard they had some magical mummy, and he offered an amount of money that I'm just telling you guys, what he told me, okay? I said, "How much did he offer?" And he gave me an amount of money that when I did the conversion would have been around almost $4 million US dollars. And I said, that
Jesus.
can't be wrong. Are you sure the Saudis can afford this, but why does the Saudi army need a magical baby mummy? Um, but I asked him, I was like, "Are you sure we're talking about the right number?" Like, because in current, if you've been to Indonesia, you know that currency exchange is tricky because the rupiah is so low. It's like 16,000 to a dollar. And I said something, "Are you sure you meant billions and not millions? Because if you knock 3 zeros off of it, it would be something like around $4,000, which might make a little bit more
More
sense." But he was
reasonable.
adamant. Well, more than I've got to spend on a mummy, let's say that way. But anyway, that's what he told me no. No, this was the amount that he offered, but it doesn't, which would be enough to rebuild the village, a dozen times. But he told me no, that the guy had offered that amount, but it didn't matter. She wasn't for sale for any price. But if you're wondering about shaking her around, he
that
wanted
back
to
up.
show that her brain is still there. That was the point. He said, her brain is still in there. And so he started shaking her like a maraca to show that her brain was still there. He also, and I found this funny, he started complaining. Oh, is the sound on?
Here,
I
let
think
me
the
check.
sound's off. Yeah. Yes.
God.
Yeah. So he also started complaining that the brain doesn't rattle as well as, which I think is probably because
So,
the brain is probably breaking into smaller pieces.
yeah, as he's exactly, it's kind of
Yes.
fragile.
Yeah. He was upset by it that her brain was not rattling the way it should.
Wow. That it's just so, I mean, the amount of money is insane, but it's just so I had asked you because you're like, what's the connection between Saudi Arabia and Indonesia? But you were, which I didn't realize that about the religions there, and that got us into another conversation of you saying that Indonesia was primarily
Indonesia is primarily Muslim. But all these people with the mummies, and we haven't mentioned this yet, and we should discuss it. Toraja is the Catholic part of Indonesia. All these people with the mummies are Catholics, which, to a Catholic in the United States, this is a very weird and perverse practice if it's considered Catholic. But you have to remember that, Catholicism always takes on two forms. Any religion really takes on two forms, but especially Catholicism, if you travel around the world. There's something about Catholicism where it tends to vary more from place to place than other religions. You'll have the doctrinal version of Catholicism as they practice it in the Vatican, and then you'll have the localized version of Catholicism. And so this happens to be Torajan Catholicism, has this intense focus on the dead. And I'll get asked questions about these photos a lot. It's like, well, what do they believe about the afterlife? What's the spiritual connection? It's like, well, they're Catholics, and people want people want some really lengthy anthropological answer about, some trip down a magical river and such, with the mummies. And it's like, well, they're actually just Catholics. All these tombs, they have a cross, right? All these tombs that keep the mummies, they've got a cross right outside the door, and they've got a picture of Jesus or the Virgin Mary. They're just Catholics.
well, assuming in Palermo they're also Catholics, correct?
Catholics. That's right.
So it's interesting
And
that they were doing the mummies too. Wonder
yeah.
like
But
that
again,
dates
it's
back
not.
to.
It wasn't abnormal.
All right. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up too was that this is just cool from a medical perspective. Some of the mummies and also these skulls we'll talk about too. They actually have signs of some kind of medical intervention, which is cool. So show pick 5 first. This one has dentures, which is kind of cool
That is cool.
that they just left them
Very,
in.
very much. Yeah.
So you
Well,
see things like that too, I suppose.
Yeah, well, she's gonna want her dentures, right? It would be an affront to her to bury her without the dentures, wouldn't it? Especially if they don't consider the dead to be dead the way we do. They leave. Okay, so we've already seen people where they leave the glasses on them, they leave the watches on them, they leave their jewelry on them. Why wouldn't they leave the dentures?
It's just really cool because you get this unusual opportunity to view a lot of people in this interesting preservation, and it's cool to see certain things. Like the next one we're going to show is let's look at number 7. So you have other photos from this trip of all of these skulls where are they exactly located?
Okay, so this is also in Indonesia. This guy obviously had a brain operation of some kind. And it looks like he might have died of it, right? Because there's not much healing going on around those cuts. But this is not from Toraja. This is from Bali. This is from Indonesia too. Bali is the Hindu part of Indonesia. This obviously, with the skull, is not a Hindu practice. There's one part of Bali called Trunyan that never converted to Hinduism. They are the original Balinese, and so they still practice the original, what we consider the more pagan practices in Bali. They have 3 different cemeteries for 3 different classes of people. There's a cemetery for babies, there's a cemetery for single people, and there's a cemetery for married people. And what they'll do, especially at that second cemetery, the dead are allowed. It's a natural green burial, effectively. The dead are laid out on the ground. They build what amount to kind of like bamboo teepees over them to keep monkeys out, to keep the monkeys from chewing on them. They build these kind of bamboo teepees over them to protect them. There's room for only a certain number of graves out there because it's a small piece of land. There's a giant tree. It's a banyan tree that naturally deodorizes the area and sought to protect the spirits of the dead. And every time someone new dies, since there are very few burial spaces, very few spaces for these bamboo teepee things, every time someone new dies, they take someone who's been decomposed and they take their bones and they put them over in a big pile. And this is the Trunyan Cemetery. So if it's on an island, you can only get there by boat. It's on an island in Lake Batur. And so if you go to Trunyan and you go to the dock, you can take a boat ride out to the cemetery and they'll just let you wander around and take pictures and view all this stuff. And you can look in the teepees and see the people who are decomposing. There's one guy who, on this trip, there was one guy who had only been there for a couple of days. He was very new. But you'll find some interesting things in that bone pile because you will see, as you said, a lot of signs of some of the medical interventions or operations that people might have had.
Yeah, this one's cool. So this guy definitely had a craniotomy. For those of you who are listening, it's surgery, as Paul said, a brain surgery. It's a perfect square on the side of the temporal bone over here, and there's 4 burr holes on each corner, and there's hardware that are adhering it to the skull. So this person had some kind of a brain injury where they had to allow for swelling of the brain. And this is a surgery they could do on people that survive it too, but they have to, because the brain is so tight within the cranial cavity, they have to open a hole basically to let it swell out to give it room. And the thought that it would swell back down and then they could just put it back basically. And they use this hardware to do it. And it's really cool that you get to see this kind of stuff on people. Do they ever have problems with people going and robbing these remains to sell them on the market because people want skulls?
Yeah, yeah, I was actually gonna say something about that. To my eye, and I've been to Trunyan several times, because every time I pass through Indonesia, if I stop in Bali, I do go to Trunyan and, just see who's new in the little teepees, see who's died, and see what's been added to the bone pile. I think there are a lot less skulls now, than there used to be. So yes, I think they do have a problem with theft, but I don't necessarily think it's Westerners who are stealing them. It would be very hard to get out to Trunyan, to that island as a Westerner, because you need to depart from their dock on a boat. And if you were departing from their dock on your boat, they'd know. They'd see you. And there's really no way to get to that cemetery except on a boat. I think it might be some shady locals who are maybe stealing them and selling them to outsiders, which, yeah, it's just as bad. I mean, the skull traffic, it's our fault. We're the ones who are buying it. If we weren't buying these things, then they wouldn't be selling them. There would be no interest in stealing them. But I definitely think that there are less skulls there than when I first went.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that a Westerner would be able. I mean, if you're just traveling on an airplane, that just would not be possible to. I mean, how are you going to get it home? I guess unless you could ship it somehow. But I see what you're saying, though. It's just less likely that they're going to do that. But who knows? Because we all have them. So like, where are they coming from originally? Sometimes you get at an antique store or whatever, but you have to think like, well, where did it come from before that?
So there's a somewhat analogous practice to some of this in Bolivia. In La Paz, there's a festival called Fiesta de las Natitas, and it's on every November 8th. And I went there something like 12 years in a row. And it's the world's largest skull festival. And every year on November 8th, these people who live with skulls in their homes as, spiritual protectors and helpers and guardians, they take the skulls back to the cemetery and they have this giant party for them. And you can go down to the cemetery. At one time, you could buy 3 human skulls at that cemetery for $10. It was kind of like a special deal. This was at one point in time, meaning like a long, long time ago, like the first time I had ever gone down there. But because in La Paz, in that cemetery, you're renting gravesite. You don't purchase it in perpetuity. You have to keep paying rent on it. And at some point in time, however many generations down the line, someone's going to stop paying the rent on your grave. And if you walk around that cemetery, you'll see eviction notices on some of the graves. It's like a pay to quit notice. And so those people get removed and they're supposed to be taken into this. Basically, you're supposed to be put in a mass pit, in a mass grave. But a lot of those skulls were getting sold by the grave diggers. And so, yeah, you can buy skulls in other parts of the world significantly cheaper than in the United States. As you said, there's an issue with getting them back into the United States, but there's no problem buying them in other parts of the world. When I used to travel in Peru, it was very easy to buy skulls at the black market in Lima. They were all over the place. I even had a woman show up at my hotel doors. A woman knocks on my hotel door, and I opened it up, and she had a bag. And she opened up the bag, and there was this mummified head in the bag. She was trying to sell me this head in my hotel room because she had seen me looking at the skulls at the black market. And I chased her out. That head had come from that head had come from an ancient burial. It was plundered. Get the hell out of here. I don't want that thing in my room. I mean, that's a bust. You can buy the skulls if you're in Peru or Bolivia or someplace like that. You can't buy the mummified heads that are stolen from the tomb.
Yeah, that just seems like it would be cursed too. But I think it's funny that she was just like, "You look like the type that would like what I have in this bag here. Let me show you."
Oh, I like it. I'm not gonna buy it.
Yeah, no, I get that. All right, there was one other photo that you talked about earlier. I just wanted to put up when you were saying that how they dressed up the mummies and stuff. Wait, which one is it? Oh, picture 4 is just shows that they're putting a cigarette in the mummy's hand.
Yeah, I love that photo.
Yeah, it's just so cool. The way that you capture these photos is just like unlike anything. It almost seems not real.
Right? First of all, I heard him now. And second of all, like I said, it's the mistake that we make when we confine ourselves to just looking at the photos or the videos. The mistake we make is thinking that this is some very somber ceremony, like people are weeping and like everybody is marching in silence up to the dead person and like deflecting their gaze and so forth. It's not true. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be celebratory. We saw the guy in the funny mask before, we see the people with the cigarettes, like I said, the people let me pose the dog with the mummy. It's supposed to be fun. And look at it this way. If you were a corpse that hadn't been out of the box for 3 years, wouldn't you want to come out and have fun instead of having everybody shut up and be silent around you?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally be into this. I don't know if my town would be into it.
Well, Paul, I think the way you explain death in other cultures is so beautiful because I think a lot of our listeners, or not a lot, I think some of our listeners might look at this and think it's strange, especially with the sterile nature of funerals and death in Western society. But when you are showing these pictures and documenting them and taking the time to learn these people's stories and the process, it's so cool to see. And it opened my eyes as somebody that wasn't really open to seeing something like this, to how really respectful and honorable it could be.
Well, and I love the fact that they happen to be Catholic. I think that's a wonderful part of it,
Yeah.
because if you weren't to write it off as, it's like, well, it's just some, perverse exotic thing, come back to the fact that they're Catholic. I mean, I guess there are people who want to write off all of Catholicism as some perverse thing, I suppose, but it's no, it's it's a religion that people practice in the United States too. It's a religion that is headquartered in Italy, and this just happens to be the local manifestation of it. So it's another tie that lets us know that just as different as this is, there's a commonality with these people and with us.
This is actually less weird to me than what we would do in our family as a traditional Catholic viewing, which is, embalming a person and then putting makeup on them to try to make them look like they're alive. It's just the weird
It's
and
so weird.
and posing them. It's weird.
Well, and it's funny because they think that our practices are, if you talk to them
Right.
about it, like, well, we put a bunch of makeup on them, they kind of swell up like a balloon. We put a bunch of makeup on them, we bury them in the ground. They're like, ooh, that sounds kind of savage.
It is like it really is when you sit there. Uh, Obviously, like all the stuff that's been happening in the news, and Charlie Kirk's wife had posted a video of herself kind of crying over his body at his viewing, and people really freaked out about this video just because his hands they thought his hands looked terrible, and I keep bringing up the point like he's dead and she's alive holding his hands, but her hand is alive and his hand has actually been, so number one, he bled out, so he was pale as hell. He's been embalmed and he has makeup on top of it to make him look alive. So yes, it looks like hell. That's what it looks like.
One of the things that I love that really touches me, and I don't know what photos you still have. Maybe we should just run through some of them, and I'll try to narrate what's going on. But one of the things I love about this thing in Indonesia, in Tana Toraja, is when they will take out the mummies of people who are severely deteriorated, severely, and they will continue and they will treat them as loving as if they were the living person. And I think that is really like that is real love. To me, that is real beauty, because to us, when we look at that, there's this revulsion. It's like, oh my God, she really looks bad. It's like, hey, you know what? The way you look is superficial. What they're celebrating is the bond underneath, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're not wearing makeup, and it doesn't matter that they look desiccated. They love these people, and they will continue to love them, and they are not revolted by them.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, all the thing is that humans are so are just so in tune to things that aren't real. And even when you have a person that's dead and you put all that makeup and stuff, it's not tricking anybody to think they look like they're sleeping. Like everyone's like, that
So
looks
her
really bad.
I had a guy, usually I try really hard to keep, the online dialogue around these photos, clean, because I don't want people insulting someone else's cultural practice. But some guy said it, and I had to admit it's true. Some guy commented on this photo when I put it online. It's like, she looks like C3PO.
Wow, yeah. She
And
really
it was
does.
really, I was like, you know what? That one, I'll let that one stay. It's really, there's a beauty. It's like good for her. You know what she kind of does, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's cool.
it's very cool what's going on with the orbit there. And it's just like it really is this unique kind of form of mummification and adipocere that it just has a very specific look compared to other time. Like if a person died and naturally mummified in Oklahoma or something, it just would have a different look, and it's just really cool.
Well, one thing about these that would really shock people, I don't know, again, if you have more photos or more of the videos to show. One thing that would really shock people, and it took me a while to get over, is when they open the caskets, they're not just when they clean them, they're not just brushing away the dust, they're brushing away insect carcasses. They're brushing away bug carcasses because the bugs are eating these too. And you'll see them constantly. Like some of them are just loaded over, and their caskets are just full of insect casings. And that would really be a hard thing, I think, for Americans to take, to not just see their dead relative all desiccated, but to see the evidence that their dead relative had been eaten by bugs, was being eaten by these insects. But it doesn't bother them at all, again, because that's all vanity. It's irrelevant. They understand what the natural process of death is, and that's part of the process, and they love these people nonetheless.
Well, all right, thank you so much for sharing this because this is just so cool. And I think the first time I ever saw you lecture about this, I was just mind blown, and I really hope that lots of people got to learn something today because it's so cool. But before we go, let's just talk about really quick because we had a story in the news a couple weeks ago. Ray, you want to get into that? I did text him about it, but
Yeah, so we had this story a few weeks ago that all these piles of ashes were found. What was it? Right outside of Las Vegas, like
yeah. So of
40
course I
40
text.
miles
I live in Las
in.
Vegas. Yeah. Yeah, I know the story. People were in shock because there was something like 19 out in the desert. There was this piece of land with 19 piles of cremation ashes found on it, just sitting there. And it was like, oh my God, the ashes of the dead are out in the desert, and so you had texted that to me and asked me about it. And I was like, it's really not that unusual.
And then you send me
First of
picture
all,
8 right away. You're like, this is
yeah,
every
first of
day
all,
for
yeah,
me.
First of all, let's get over it. It's only ash, it's not like they're dumping murder victims out there. It's not like they're dumping corpses out there that are rotting. It's just ash. And I told you, well, actually, I just found a pile of cremation ashes somewhere else because this is actually really common. A lot of poor people who don't know what to do with their dead relatives, and for some reason they might not want them or be able to have them. Now, so they'll just take them out to the desert and spread them in the desert, or they'll put them somewhere in the desert. And I think that pile that they had found, I think people were kind of using that as a makeshift cemetery. If I drive out in the desert, I will find all over the place. I'll find little makeshift pet cemeteries and so forth. People have picked some patch of land and just turned it into a pet cemetery. There might be 10 or 20 burials there. And so I mentioned to you, it's like, well, yeah, I just found another pile of ashes just the other day. It was over by one of the pet cemeteries, but it was definitely not a pet. It was too big for that. And so someone had poured out someone's cremation ashes and put there's a beer bottle in there, and it looked like they took a piece of wood and a little block, and they were using it as a kind of a makeshift altar. So I think they poured out the cremation ashes, had a drink with their buddy or their brother or their dad or whoever it was, and made a little offering on that altar and left them there.
That's so cool. You really get to see just for being out there in the desert for the first time, really driving around like that last year. You just don't really realize that there's just it could be a potential dumping ground for so many things which you stumble across all the time while you're going out there.
Well, and for the good and the bad, because a lot of people do dump animals out there. And in fact, this is a story that I think is far more interesting than the ashes. There was a story about a veterinarian in Las Vegas who got caught on camera beating up a horse.
Mhm.
And then the veterinarian disappeared, and they found his body lying on the shore of Lake Mead.
We covered that story. Do you remember, Ray?
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we did
Yeah,
actually.
they found
Yeah.
yeah, that was not far from here. They found his body by Lake Mead. The veterinarian who beat up the horse was found dead by Lake Mead. So they
Wow.
dumped him out there too.
Yeah, that's It's just something that when you live in like the East Coast, we just don't really have a lot of that because there's not space to do stuff like that. I just was really shocked driving through Texas and stuff of all of the abandoned houses and just cars and just it's just there and it just sits there and of course all the photos that you take when you go out on your adventures all the time.
Well, that's why I live in the desert, because it's this treasure trove of ghost towns and abandoned stuff. I was going to mention too that in my book about pet cemeteries, They Fall into Death, which we talked about last year, there is a large desert pet cemetery outside of Las Vegas in Boulder City. And the pet cemetery in Boulder City was founded in the 1950s in the desert, just a desert place for people to bury, a free spot for people to bury pets. And that has always, in the early days, was always reputed to actually be a mafia dump site for bodies. That pet cemetery that the mafia was taking it, because the mob, they ran Las Vegas. They probably still
Yeah.
do. But it was that had long been the rumor that some of those graves for dogs and so forth out in Boulder City were actually mafia hits. They would just have someone take them out to the pet cemetery and bury them and put a dog's gravestone to get rid of
Wow,
them.
that's
It's
that's
so cool.
yeah, it's very interesting though because that's probably true. I would love to
I don't
see
know.
them like dig them up. I guess I don't know. Maybe they should just leave it. So are
I
you
think
are
it's
you working on any other projects? Like what is Paul doing now?
uh, I'm doing something totally related. I spent all my time studying the history of 19th century railroad dogs. I know, no comment
Okay,
at all.
tell us. We
What?
want to know.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
tell us. We want to know everything.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, okay. Well, everything's a lot. I just became obsessed with the story of these dogs because they've been largely forgotten. In the 19th century, there were these dogs that would just ownerless dogs that would just jump on and off trains and travel all around the country. And some of them became really big celebrities. They basically became heroes. They became like, the Jack Kerouac on the road for that generation because a good person a good person didn't just run away from society. It was not an age where individualism was considered a virtue. And so, a good person was an industrious person, and these dogs kind of lived out the fantasy of freedom for the newspaper crowd, reading where these dogs were going and what they were doing. And of course, then they were totally forgotten. But the thing that really strikes me about the stories of these dogs, first of all, is how we create heroes, how we abandon heroes, and then how because these dogs represented freedom for the newspaper reading crowd that would follow their adventures. And how every time we think we're advancing to freedom, every time we think we're becoming more and more free, it actually turns out we're going in the opposite direction. And maybe those dogs in the 19th century, maybe they had something for us that we can still learn from about what freedom really is.
you're a genius. You really are.
I
I
don't
love
know.
the way that you're
I,
I love the way that
I just like weird stories.
but it's just very relevant right now. And you
I
know
think it is
that
very
we have
relevant
these
right now. That's why I became so addicted to the stories of these dogs.
yeah,
Because
it's awesome.
the way I see it in terms of freedom, we keep going backwards. And maybe it was actually really simple all along. Maybe these dogs knew. You just turn around. If you want to be free, and you don't like where you are, you turn around and
Yeah. You're so right. It's just like the most relevant topic, especially this week. And we talk about that in our private talks that just like everything doesn't have to be improved. Some things are just good. Just leave it alone.
yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. I think that our listeners are just going to freak out over this episode. They're going to love it.
I hope so.
Where can everyone just tell? I mean, we always talk. You don't even know this, but we talk about you on the show all the time, and we give out your Instagram. But just give out where do you want people to find you?
I'm gonna dox myself. Um,
Yes.
I'm on Instagram under Hexenkult, HEXENKULT. I don't do TikTok. I don't do X.
keeping it simple. But Paul has lectures all over, and sometimes you do virtual ones too. So if you guys are interested in hearing more about this, because obviously we could listen to you all day. Like, you just have such a great life and great life stories to tell.
Well, I only have one lecture coming up. It's in Northern California. I've cut back on a lot of that because I really need to get some work done.
I get that.
You know,
It's
the,
hard.
dog,
No,
the
it's
dogs
hard.
are
No.
out there waiting for me.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much. We love you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor, and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.